Am I the Ahole for wanting to walk away from a 5-year relationship? I, 30F, attempted to terminate a 5-year relationship because my partner, 32M, accused me not only of cheating on him 3 times, but also of questioning the paternity of our 3rd child. Let me provide you with the context that led to this entire situation. I was previously married in an abusive relationship, which deeply impacted me. I recognized many similarities in this current relationship, and I had previously experienced a pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. I had already shared all of this with him, so this explanation will be quite lengthy. We met in December 2019 and started dating shortly thereafter. Initially, everything was positive. We both had jobs and vehicles. I lived independently while he resided with his parents. Please don't judge. On weekends, he would sleep over at my place, and I would spend one night at his parents' house each week. However, things changed when the pandemic struck, and he lost his job. For a few months, I stayed at his mother's house since I didn't have my car and he was unwell. I was still working and maintaining my own apartment, which I desperately wanted to return to since I was paying rent but not living there. Nonetheless, he managed to guilt me into staying at his mother's place, a major red flag, I know. Soon after, I discovered that my boyfriend's brother had lost custody of his children to the Department of Human Services due to child neglect, abandonment, and domestic violence. Although my boyfriend claimed to value family, he told the department that he wouldn't take them in and couldn't find anyone willing to help, which was untrue, as I had expressed a desire to be a foster mother previously. When his brother approached me about taking in his children, I agreed, with the intention of caring for them until he got back on his feet or stopped using drugs and acting foolishly. 2 out of the 3 children were his brother's, while the other was the child of his brother's girlfriend. My boyfriend had no experience with children, which I acknowledged. I informed him that until he passed the background check, he wouldn't be able to sleep over, as recommended by the caseworker. He didn't like that and thought I was suggesting we should break up, though I only found out later that he believed that. As I took in the kids, I also allowed my boyfriend, whom we will call Brian, to move in. The pandemic created stress for everyone. Brian had to stay home with the children since he refused to work and didn't want to send them to daycare, which left me to shoulder the burden of work. I was fine with this until later on. I ensured that I took a short vacation before leaving Brian alone with the kids to make sure he knew how to change diapers, measure formula properly, and establish nap times. These children were his niece and nephew, and I wanted to ensure they were well cared for while I was at work. After a couple of weeks working and dealing with paperwork, Brian's mother, let's call her Lily, wanted visitation with her grandchildren. I was fine with that, but she expressed difficulty driving the distance to my place and was afraid of driving on the highway, which led to significant arguments between Brian and me. I learned I was pregnant not long after and wanted to move to a larger apartment to give the children more space. Brian suggested moving closer to his mother, arguing that she would help us and that it made logistical sense since that was where the children's visitation had been arranged with their parents. Logically, this made sense, but we needed a house, as Brian preferred not to share walls with neighbors. He had grown up in a house and only experienced apartment living when he moved in with me. Thus, I questioned him about getting a job if we wanted a house because we needed extra funds for rent and bills, but he declined due to the kids and COVID, insert eye roll. Eventually, we found a house just 5 minutes from his mother's, conveniently located near the visitation area. I was still working, but he made my life difficult if I didn't wear a mask outside. As a result, I had to commute an hour to work and back. Even though I could have transferred, I was unhappy with alternative locations. While I worked, Brian became lethargic and didn't contribute as he spent most of the time sleeping or merely feeding the kids or changing their diapers. His mother rarely visited, only once a month, and would refuse to babysit if I asked her to. During my pregnancy, I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. The stress from Brian and his mother not helping me took a toll on my health, prompting my mother, Lee, to come from another state to assist me. My mom took care of the kids while I worked and witnessed firsthand how Brian acted at home. She also observed how I managed once I finished work. Brian would hardly leave his room, opting to play video games and vape instead, while I was busy cleaning, feeding the children, teaching them things, and taking them to doctor's appointments and therapy. Lee spoke with Brian's mother, Lily, about his behavior at home, but Lily defended him, saying he was simply not used to this new situation and would eventually overcome his depression. This dynamic continued for several months until the day I was induced due to high blood pressure. I had already been in the hospital for a few days, and Brian barely came to see me. I wished my mom could have visited, but she had to watch the kids since I didn't trust anyone else with them. I was in labor for 32 hours, and Brian arrived only 9 hours before I gave birth, bringing his mother with him because he couldn't handle the entire situation. He refused to cut the umbilical cord or hold our son, who was born premature but is now healthy. Fast forward a year and a half later, Brian's brother Bob regained custody of his children, with Lily allowing him to move back in. Bob had even threatened both our lives and their fathers. I obtained custody of the oldest child due to her biological mother's lack of involvement and her biological father's refusal to care for her. I stopped working because I could not trust Brian to look after my 2 children, and I pushed him to get a job in 2022. While he worked, I returned to school to pursue a medical degree. The income I earned from school went into the household, which included rent, bills, clothing, and diapers for my children. I ensured my oldest child attended school while taking care of my son, but I soon realized I wasn't receiving any support from Brian's family. Lily rarely visited, always making excuses, and did not want to be involved with my eldest because she is not related to her. Furthermore, she often complained about my children and I not wearing masks, citing her weak immune system and concern about potentially dying from COVID. Brian eventually invited his best friend to move in with us, along with his friend's girlfriend, which was chaos for me. They didn't pay rent properly and refused to clean up after themselves. Brian's friend Rodney was an alcoholic, which concerned me greatly. I established a rule that he could not come home drunk or consume any alcohol in our house, nor could he smoke weed. Brian was no help in this situation, but he did kick them out once he discovered they had COVID. 8 months into Brian's job, he woke me in the middle of the night, saying he wanted to quit because he was depressed and dissatisfied with himself. I said okay and asked what he planned to do, to which he replied that he wanted to work out to feel better about his weight, asking for a couple of months to get back to work. I agreed and believed I could manage for a short time. I continued to ensure I was covering expenses, but when the time came, he requested an extension until the end of the year. I was infuriated. However, I told him yes, but made it clear that this was his final chance. I ensured all necessary bills were paid and gently reminded him just before the year concluded that he needed to secure employment, as I couldn't hold our household together indefinitely. At the start of 2023, he proclaimed he didn't want to work, so I told him he could leave. I took a minimum wage job at night, enabling me to avoid worrying about childcare, as Brian would be home during the nights. I stayed at that job for just 4 days when Brian confronted me, asking if we were breaking up. I replied honestly, stating yes, he was unreliable and solely focused on himself. He let his mother influence him, which damaged our relationship, and I felt like I was carrying the weight of everything. I was forced to adjust my life to fit what he wanted, which was unjust. I deserved better, and so did my children. I announced my intention to return to the state where I grew up to be near my parents, as I believed I would receive better support there. He cried, begged, and pleaded with me, but I made it clear that I had given him countless opportunities he didn't merit and was determined to leave. He asked if securing a job would change my mind, and I said I would consider it. He attempted to find work, submitting only 2 applications and doing food delivery, while I returned to a grocery store and saved enough money to move and transfer to another store in the state I was headed to. When moving day arrived, I suggested he stay with his mother to figure out what he wanted to do because I didn't want to clean up after him or compensate for his inadequacies while residing with my parents. He refused and chose to come along instead. Upon arrival, he paid the deposit for the storage unit and the first month. This was commendable, but I ended up covering his car insurance and phone bill. I brushed it off, thinking I was working and only planning a short stay with my parents to save money. It took Brian some time to find a job, but when he did, he spent all his earnings on fast food and even dropped $400 on a basketball goal he never used because it had to be a professional. when it couldn't be a cheap version. I managed my own car insurance, phone plan, health insurance, groceries, diapers, baby wipes, school uniforms, school supplies, storage unit fees, cat food, cat litter, and monthly streaming services he frequently utilized. My parents were generous in allowing us to stay with them, and as is common when staying at someone else's residence for a while, you are no longer a guest. My parents had expectations of us, basically to clean up after ourselves and not burden them, which I was fine with, while Brian struggled because he wasn't accustomed to living with others. This resulted in significant arguments, as he wanted to move while I questioned how he would finance such an endeavor. I was responsible for the monthly expenses, and he wasn't saving. Soon, we had to return to his state for a week due to his father's passing and rented a car with help from his mother. I refrained from purchasing insurance on the car due to budget constraints, my error, I know. During our time there, I managed the household, cleaned after the children, prepared dinner, and did laundry. While I wasn't obligated to do any of this, I did it to assist Lily and let her and Brian grieve. As we returned to my state, I received minimal sleep while Brian drove because he needed company to remain alert. Eventually, we switched drivers, and as I was driving home, a deer unexpectedly appeared, and I could not avoid the collision. I checked on my children, but Brian remained oblivious, having slept through the entire event and waking up confused when I called his name. Although the front end of the car was damaged, it was still operational, yet I had to continue paying $6,000 for repairs, which I am still managing. The rental company returned our $300 deposit, which was appreciated. After this, Brian didn't return to work immediately, and I was forced to find a new job to earn more money. I worked an hour away again, but it was manageable for the time being. A few months passed, and Brian began to go through my phone. He discovered a message from a high school classmate who was attempting to flirt with me, and despite the classmate being married, Brian accused me of cheating on him with this individual, claiming my recent distance was to blame. I explained to him that my distance was due to needing personal space from him, as I couldn't even enjoy 10 minutes to myself without him coming to look over my shoulder or barging into the bathroom when I would lock the door to shower just to argue with me. The toxicity in our relationship escalated, which I pointed out to him, noting that it had been unhealthy for a while. His constant surveillance made me uncomfortable, so I shared my location with him in an attempt to alleviate his concerns, a decision I later regretted. Brian lost his job and lingered for weeks before obtaining a new one, but he quit that job after only 4 days and moved on to another one that lasted only a couple of months. He wasn't content with that job and quit again. Around fall 2024, I had a high school reunion that coincided with my birthday on the same day. I wanted to attend since I hadn't seen several friends in a long time because they lived in different states. I discussed it with Brian, who initially approved. However, when a hurricane hit our area, we almost had to cancel the reunion, but we persevered. So, the day before my birthday, I drove to the meetup and had a fantastic time with my friends. Everything was going well until I noticed that Brian had turned off his location sharing on his end, which I shrugged off because I was enjoying myself with friends. We planned to celebrate and drink the next day during the actual reunion. When I returned home that evening, Brian interrogated me about my activities. I explained frankly what I had done, reconnected with friends, organized playdates for our younger children, and checked if our older kids wanted to hang out, reminiscing about the simpler times of childhood. On my birthday, Brian had to work, which was fine with me. I asked my parents if they would be willing to watch the kids, and they agreed. Since I planned to drink that evening, I took an Uber to the reunion without any issues. I spent time with friends, and we enjoyed drinks. I should clarify that I did not get drunk. I merely became tipsy and cut myself off because I was in public. I know how I can be when intoxicated, and I did not want to embarrass myself. An after-party was planned following the reunion, but upon arrival, we decided to leave since some guests were packing up, and we didn't want to be around if anything went awry. Instead, we proceeded to a gaming venue owned by one of our classmates to hang out. Brian ended up stalking me that night, claiming he had no work obligations and followed me to all 3 locations I visited. At the gaming venue, I told him where I was and invited him to join us. I introduced him to my friends, sharing that I had attended middle school with some and others were high school acquaintances. However, Brian acted awkwardly towards one of my friends who owned the venue, so to shorten our visit, we offered another classmate a ride to her hotel, which was an hour away. The next day, Brian behaved unusually, repeatedly asking if I had enjoyed myself and inquiring if I would consider doing something like this again. I was taken aback but assured him I had a great time and showed him videos from the event. 3 days later, I woke up to find Brian attempting to unlock my phone, so I observed quietly as he grabbed my hand, trying to access it. I questioned him about his behavior, and he concocted a ridiculous excuse claiming he was seeking a hentai website I had previously watched while single. I shot him a look, set my phone aside, and went back to sleep. The following day, I confronted him regarding his ludicrous reasoning for going through my phone. I handed it to him, asserting that I had nothing to hide, but warned him that if he continued such behavior, there would be consequences. After a rough day at work, I decided to visit a cozy bar known for its excellent pizza. I had never gotten a chance to eat there due to supply issues following the recent hurricane that left debris everywhere. Instead of ordering food, I allowed myself a drink and was checking my email when I noticed Brian had again disabled his location sharing. Moments later, he unexpectedly appeared at the bar, asking if we could talk. Panic ensued. The man I had been with for a while had been stalking me in the past few days, which I recognized because of his location changes. He accused me of cheating with one of my male friends simply because he possessed money while Brian did not. This was the second time he had made such an accusation, and I was increasingly fed up with it. Brian explained that he felt insecure because he was in an unfamiliar area without friends or family, to which I responded that I had introduced him to people, and he hadn't made any effort to connect with them. I also reminded him of how my parents treated him like their own child. Brian expressed dissatisfaction with his decision to move when I had suggested he stay with his mom, but I insisted we needed space, and if we were to work on ourselves, we must do so separately. Attempting to navigate this together was negatively affecting both us and the kids. He pleaded for another chance, and I acquiesced. A few days later, he tried accessing my phone again in the middle of the night and, for the third time, accused me of infidelity, stalking me again at the grocery store as I picked up food for our children. When I returned home that day, I exploded, demanding he leave and declaring I was done. I called his mother, asking her to come take her child, stating I could no longer handle the situation. Brian made one last effort to sleep with me, which perpetuated the argument until he eventually departed, returning to his mother's house, 16 hours away from me and the children. That night, I also discovered I was pregnant. The following day, when I informed him, his mother questioned whether the child was his, which left him unsure. I was devastated by the heartbreak that I dealt with. I told him and Lily that they could both go to hell. I could not endure being accused repeatedly and then questioned on the paternity of my child. I asserted that once the baby was born, I would conduct a DNA test on both children because he and his family could leave me alone. Am I the asshole? Story 2. Should I reach out to this guy? I am really thinking about it, because what if he's just not reaching out because he thinks I am not interested? I am scared he just isn't trying because he's really shy and thinks I've moved on from him, but I still care about him. In April of last year, I encountered a guy with whom I fell deeply in love. We had some minor flirtations the previous year, so I somewhat sensed his interest in me, but nothing materialized from it. In April 2024, he added me on Snapchat. He began flirting with me, and we played Fortnite together, talking until 2 a.m. We discovered we had many things in common: same church, homeschooling for the semester, similar interests, and we really connected. He was quite shy but undeniably adorable, and I found myself falling for him at that moment. We engaged in a lengthy argument about who would hang up the phone, which lasted about 20 minutes before we eventually drifted off to sleep. I provided him with my number, and the following morning, we woke up at the exact same time, leading him to text me. We chatted for several weeks, and it was absolutely wonderful. I did a great deal for him, and we truly fell in love. He expressed that he would marry me one day. I even made him my wallpaper, and I asked my mom to drive past his house so he could see me. He repeatedly told me how beautiful I was, and he seemed genuinely in awe when I drove by his place, and I was too. Sometimes, it felt like a cruel joke because everything seemed so perfect. Why me, you know? That Sunday, I saw him at church, and he walked right past me. I said hello, and he kept on walking, but he later apologized, stating he got nervous and wanted me to follow him. From that day until the following Tuesday, he became increasingly sexual with me. He told me he wanted to have sex with me at church, complimenting how hot I looked in my dress, which was quite overwhelming because we were still in love, but the feelings were noticeably diminished. He often used terms like sexy or hot rather than beautiful, which are words that truly make a woman feel valued. After we had discussed sexual topics on the phone, I reminded him that my love for him extended beyond that, encompassing everything about him. However, he simply replied, "You too." We began engaging in sexual activities frequently. He wanted me to take the lead so that he wouldn't feel guilty. I wanted him to be happy. That's all I wished for his love. On Monday night, he was genuinely sweet and assured me that the next day, when we arranged for him to meet my aunt, he would express how in love he was with me. I drove to his house the following day, and he suggested that I stand close enough so my aunt couldn't see while he would touch me. But I was uncomfortable and didn't want to, so I stood a bit farther away. He was kind to my aunt, and we exchanged a lot of flirty glances, hugging a couple of times, which felt great. However, during the last hug, he grabbed my rear and then I departed. The remainder of the day, he was overly sexual with me, rushing me home to show him things. He wanted me to skip practice that night to come over and have sex, but I declined. He was talking about playing Fortnite with another girl, and I jokingly warned him against it because I thought he might be trying to make me jealous. I didn't truly care. He could have friends if he wanted to, as I trusted him, and we weren't officially a couple yet, but I assumed he was just teasing me. However, he didn't respond to my "I love you" before my practice or anything else. When I returned, he seemed distant and then broke up with me. He mentioned that he spoke with his parents, who didn't think he was ready for a relationship. He claimed to love me deeply and would always do so, expressing his profound regret and saying that if our timing had aligned, it would have been wonderful. I simply responded, "Oh, okay," while still remaining kind and assuring him that I understood. That very night, we called and played Fortnite, and he said that just because we weren't together didn't mean we couldn't still be sexual. As you might expect, we ended up being friends with benefits for a month. Did I want that? No. Did I love him? More than anything. He became upset because I had reached out to my ex, which he spotted in my story. I hadn't texted him all weekend, but that was because he was often distant and appeared uninterested unless we were being sexual. Perhaps he thought I was moving on, but he was extremely angry. He did not even tell me why. He simply stated, "I'm kind of upset you didn't reply to me," and I apologized for his apparent disinterest, to which he exclaimed, "F no, I always want to talk to you." Then he shifted the conversation back to something sexual that night before becoming distant again. The following Monday, we communicated throughout the day, and later, he expressed that it was irritating and he was feeling sick and very upset with me. I penned a lengthy apology addressing everything I could think of for which to apologize, and he replied with just a "K." He continued being either mean or unresponsive, so I decided to stop messaging him. One day, I reached out again, and he was unfriendly, telling me to go talk to my ex. It was just cruel remarks like that. That night, I kept apologizing and expressing how I cared. I emphasized that if we were going to be friends, we needed to communicate. He replied that we weren't anything and he didn't want to communicate with me. Essentially, we concluded everything with goodbyes. He was high and called me that night, claiming he had meant to call his friend while saying I was annoying and didn't want to discuss it. Eventually, he got back in touch, somewhat kind yet still hinting at a sexual tone, while I was quite cold towards him during that conversation due to my hurt feelings, and then he blocked me. It seemed he wanted me to chase after him, but I didn't. He later returned, saying he had intended to block someone else and was very sorry, and then proceeded to use me again that same night. In June, he briefly joined my Fortnite party. In July, he invited me to another party, where he told me that he had been grounded and couldn't text me and was in significant trouble. He apologized for everything and reiterated that he loved me, saying goodnight with, "I love you," on the first night we were back in contact. I simply responded, "Then act like it." He claimed he would speak to me at church the following morning, but he didn't. He mentioned that he had a rough morning because his friend had been hit by a truck, so I was understanding. I was talking to another guy, but I was about to end things with him due to our awkward age gap, as I didn't think my mom would approve. That guy was also quite unkind to me, though I did not miss him at all. I was simply there as a friend during this difficult time. The guy I was talking to was flirty, but I would shrug it off, knowing he wasn't prepared for anything serious. A few days later, his friend passed away, and after that, we played Fortnite together. During a game, he heard my phone conversation with the other guy and became furious, calling him my side piece, and asking, "So, who is your boyfriend?" I clarified that he wasn't. We just couldn't be together due to the age difference. That night, I officially ended things with that guy because it simply felt wrong. He continued making comments about it, and when my Xbox shut off, he stopped talking to me entirely after that day, which felt unfair since he was the one who left me. I understood he was not ready because of the loss of his friend, but I wanted him to know I was always there for him and he could reach out to me at any time, so I prayed that he realized that. In August, I sent him a happy birthday message. He said he didn't have my number saved and responded coolly. Then in November, he called me randomly. When I answered, he asked if my mom and I had ever gotten that house near him, and I told him we had not, adding that we were still where we had been. He acknowledged this, but then fell silent for a moment before stating that was all he wanted to know. I engaged a bit more, assuring him that I liked the house, and he mentioned it as well, and then there was another lull in the conversation like we were both waiting for a prompt from the other person. Finally, he said, "Well, that's all I wanted, goodbye," and I replied, "Goodbye." He sounded rather nervous but was nonetheless polite and calm. When I see him at church, he tends to stare at me, although he seldom comes anymore. That's the end of it. Story 3. Parents don't accept long-distance relationships. Hello everyone. I, male, 22, have been in a long-distance relationship with a girl, female, 21, for a year and a half. I apologize for my English, but I would like to share my situation. We both live in Italy, and we met after she attended an event near my location. After some time, we began to communicate through text messages. Initially, after I started developing feelings for her, I informed my parents a couple of weeks later, and they were pleased about it. Eventually, we became a couple, and after a month of dating, I decided to visit her, which gave my parents the chance to meet her as well. Following the meeting, my parents began to harbor doubts about her, despite not knowing her well, and started to criticize her appearance. They even began to ask people who knew her what kind of person she was and whether she was decent. For the record, she comes from a good family that has also welcomed me, and she has always treated me with respect. Neither she nor her family has been vulgar. She shows me a great deal of love, supports me in every situation, understands me well, and I reciprocate these feelings. We care for each other deeply, and her parents consider me like a son, as I often communicate with them during our daily video calls. For my parents, this relationship is not valid because of the distance, leading them to think negatively, as many people do, and they believe she is toying with me, which is entirely untrue, as we are both committed to making our relationship work. Both her acquaintances and family are aware of our relationship and support it, but it seems my parents lack understanding of what we truly share. On social media, we frequently post stories together, which annoys my parents. I blocked both of them from viewing the stories, but some people share them. They argue that I appear bad to those who see our photos and claim that she has no right to post them. I don't understand their issue, as she is my girlfriend and I fully consent to her sharing our pictures. They have requested that I remove them, but I refuse to comply. I discussed this situation with my girlfriend, explaining that my parents do not accept her, which made her feel very upset. Yet, neither of us intends to give up because we genuinely love each other, and we are determined to fight for our relationship until circumstances improve. However, the way things are progressing, my parents continue to speak ill of her and our relationship without knowing her or her family. I frequently have arguments with my parents about this at home, and apparently, they are unwilling to accept our relationship or get to know my girlfriend and her family. Despite the many discussions that have occurred and will continue to occur with my parents, I refuse to feel defeated. My girlfriend and her parents, who are aware of everything, consistently support me, and I feel more encouraged by them than by my own parents. I must clarify that I have a very normal relationship with my parents in general, and they do not interfere in my life, but I cannot comprehend why they are being so intrusive regarding this matter. This summer, my girlfriend and I planned an outing with her parents, and we had a wonderful time together. My parents obviously did not take it well, even though I expressed that I would be with all of them that day. Whenever my girlfriend and I spend time together, there are almost always arguments when I return home, with both parties using very harsh language. Besides the negative impact of the distance, there is also my parents' refusal to accept this relationship because they claim to have heard rumors about her and her family, which are completely false. I confronted my girlfriend about these accusations, and she denied everything. Despite my efforts to defend our relationship, it seems my parents do not heed my words, and instead, they view me as a victim, protecting me from something I am unaware of. I find their behavior exaggerated. A couple of months ago, my mother managed to obtain my girlfriend's mother's phone number and called her. They had a disagreement during which my mother insisted she advise her daughter to stop seeing me, a request I found absurd. Firstly, we are not children whom parents need to dictate who we can date, and secondly, I consider it unreasonable that my mother would seek out the number solely for a confrontation. After that call, both my girlfriend and her mother cried because they did not expect to hear such words. Last month, my father had the ill-advised idea of going to the city where my girlfriend lives and showing up outside her home to speak with her parents, who were out for work. He ended up talking to my girlfriend, and I need not express the shock it caused her, as neither of us anticipated such behavior. Unsurprisingly, her parents were very upset and concerned for their daughter. I was infuriated because I felt he crossed a boundary and explained my feelings to him, but it seems they still do not comprehend my perspective. Both my girlfriend and I experience stress over this situation, but we continue to support one another and do everything possible to defend our relationship. I have consistently received support from those who know us and are aware of this predicament, including my girlfriend and her parents. I believe that in 2025, attitudes like this should not exist. These sentiments are archaic. I am extremely distressed by this situation, as it has persisted for months, and nothing appears to have changed in my parents' outlook. I wish they would at least make an effort to understand, but that does not seem to be the case. Given the current circumstances, I am contemplating leaving home to avoid the constant negative criticism from my parents, which makes me feel terrible. I recognize this will be challenging, but my goal is to live a peaceful life without stress. Children expect to receive emotional support and to be understood by their parents, even if only to a minimal extent. Unfortunately, that does not seem to be my experience. In summary, my parents do not accept my year-and-a-half-long long-distance relationship, and I am unsure how to proceed. I apologize for the lengthy post and appreciate your taking the time to read it. I welcome any advice or opinions you may have on this matter.